Morning and welcome everyone. Great to see you all here and welcome to our virtual audience across Europe. I'm Sally Lowe, CEO of Lowe Associates, based in Brussels. You will have seen our wonderful team, there's a few of them around the room here, who've been helping everywhere to manage this conference, the most important annual event for European SMEs and startups. I'm so proud of our team and of the fact that we've been helping the European Commission run this assembly since we started in Cyprus in 2012. Like many of you, we are an SME. We started out more than 12 years ago, and now we're scaling up from our Brussels space. And so I'm as keen as anyone to hear about the experiences and characteristics this morning of scale-up businesses. We're receiving a report today of a project based in 5 European countries, which has been jointly led by the European Commission and the OECD, and which takes a new approach to understand the factors which characterize effective scale-up businesses, and we hope which lead to more successful scale-ups. We've seen an increase in startups across Europe following the COVID lockdown and economic disruption. And we want to see this lead to more scale-up opportunities in the next period as those startups survive, prosper, and thrive and grow and move on to greater things. This post-pandemic period, however, will be a challenging business environment. And this report and these findings today will be of great value to our business networks and to policymakers across Europe. So I'm very glad to welcome today our excellent panel. We have Ludger Odenthal, who is head of the SME Performance Review team at DG Grow. Alexander Lemke, who is head of the Economic Analysis Unit in the OECD Centre for Entrepreneurship, SMEs, Regions and Cities. And Ana Costa Paula, who is head of the Business Policy Unit in the Portuguese Ministry of Economy and Digital Transition. And finally, but not least, Jan Bormans, Chief Executive of the European Startup Network. So welcome to all of you. I'm going to ask Ludger first and Alexander to present their findings. And then I will ask Anna and Jan to respond. Thank you, Ludger.
Well, good morning from my side. I'd like to kick off the proceedings for this session by giving you an overview of the policy context, what this project is about. It's a very exciting project in my view, and it's exciting because, well, 2 reasons. One is, first of all, the subject. This is about getting a better, deeper understanding about scale-ups, or / high-growing firms, highly dynamically growing firms. And this is, of course, a group of firms that we like to have in Europe, that we like to have more in Europe, because it's not just about creating jobs. Of course, that in itself would be important, but they tend to be really a source for dynamism for the whole economy and a source for innovation. So this is why it's very relevant and exciting to look at this group of firms. The project is also exciting because it takes this project is about getting a deeper understanding about who these firms are. You know, who these 9-10% in firms in the EU are who are dynamically growing. You know, It's about, and this understanding is generated through kind of a novel way of working together with us, the Commission, the OECD, and national institutions, national statistical offices or other institutions that do have data on firms, business data, that is out there, that is extremely rich and often not very much used. And this project is about basically, opening this treasure trove and making much more sense of it. And not just for its own sake, but as we explain later on the panel, just to do better policy, you know. I think, you know, living now, the 21st century is the data century, as I say, and it's, of course, in the business world, data gets much more and more important, and businesses get more smarter with using data, but the flip side of that has to be also, as policymakers, we have to get smarter in using data and to develop policies. So this project is really also about, you know, a novel form of cooperation, and I think the pilot phase that we just concluded and the results of which will Alexander will from the OECD will just present is going to show, you know, very promising results. And the reason why we have started this approach and geared it towards this area of scale-ups and not other policy areas is A, because they're important, as I said, and it's also because we know so little about it. Right now, before the project start, if you basically, the answer to the question, what do we know about fast-growing firms in the EU, would have to be, well, there's about 8 or 10% of them, you know, and you would have also some, you know, some rough notion about, okay, they may in this sector or not sector. Is that enough to do policy? Surely not. You need way more information. You want to know who is behind this, who are the entrepreneurs behind it. Are these firms that have just rapidly going Brazils that are just 2 or 3 years old, or are these long-established firms? Which sectors are they in? Which, you know, which type of employment do they generate? You know, what's their innovation profile, and all that. All that information is very much needed to you know, fine-tune our policy instruments. The EU has been very active in the last 5-6 years to promote startups and scale-ups. There has been a startup scale-up initiative, a lot of other initiatives that have been also presented throughout the days here in the Assembly. And in terms of startups, we've been really successful, I think, one can say after a couple of years. Europe is no longer so much behind in startup activity, but when it comes to scale-ups, and that's the real litmus test of this policy, how many of these newly found firms are not just there for some couple of years and then stagnate and then fall by the wayside, but really continue to grow, continue to create employment, and continue to create innovation. You know, that's the real litmus test. And there we know very little, and what we know is there Europe has not made the advances that it should be, and that means we need to design better support measures, and that return, of course, means we need a better understanding whom we design these measures for. And this is what this project is about. As I said, today marks the basic conclusion of the pilot phase. Next year, we will broaden the project and open it up to more countries, more than the 5 countries. We'll invite another 10 countries to join us. So this is also an appeal, and with this I conclude, you know, to all the policymakers, envoys who are in this room or virtually following this, to come up to us, contact us, and to discuss whether, you know, it would be also interesting for your country to join this exciting project, you know, because it, as will be shown here in this panel, it has a lot of potential to generate a lot of new insights. So thank you very much for your attention this morning, and I hand over to Alexander to explain a bit the findings. Thank you.
Thank you, Ludger, and thank you everyone for joining us both in person and virtually. And for me, this is one of the most exciting pieces of work I had the opportunity to work on, and I'm very grateful for the opportunity to cooperate with the European Commission on this one. Because when we started out, we actually realized that scaling up, scalers, they're everywhere. Everyone wants to do something about them. Everyone thinks they're important. Everyone knows they're important. But we actually have huge gaps in understanding who are those scalers. Are we even talking about the same things when we talk about scaling up and about scalers? And there was a bit of vagueness around the notion where basically, you could fill the space with what you thought was the most important thing of the day. But we didn't really understand who are the firms that have potential to get us forward, to create this dynamism that Ludger mentioned. And especially in these times where we're looking at a crisis, where we look at deep depression in a lot of our economies, getting firms that grow rapidly, that get us out of those crises, that scale up what they're doing, are of vital importance. So one of the things we want to do in this project is understand really what on earth is a scaler, how can we approach this across the different countries in a harmonized fashion so that we get information that we can actually compare across countries so that you can see, well, how is my country doing compared to others, and not just have to rely on your country on your own. Given that a lot of things that we see on scalers, the variation that we see in terms of scaling up rates, how many firms actually become scalers, varies a lot with the business cycle over time. If opportunities are there are more of them. If there are fewer, well, there are fewer opportunities, there are also fewer scalers. So what did we do? What we did is we agreed to do a project that is a pilot phase. So as Ludger mentioned, this is something we did for a handful of countries, OECD and EU member countries, but something that we want to use as a pilot to kick off into a next phase and say, we invite everyone who wants to be kind of part of this initiative to help SMEs scale up to join us. And so the first report we produced, Helping SMEs Scale Up, is our series, looks at understanding firm growth. It's a very data-driven kind of exercise, looking very much at defining, understanding scalers, what is happening to them before, during, and after they're scaling up. And we're complementing this with further reports and further initiatives coming forward. There's work on the policies that help scalers, that will help firms scale up. And then in the hopefully next years, we will manage to complement the 5 countries we have already with additional countries. And for me, the more the merrier. So without further ado, what on earth is a scaler? So what we did is we looked at all the different definitions that are out there that people use. And in the end, where we ended up is we're looking at firms that are growing very rapidly over a short period of time, high growth firms. In the European context, that is typically 10% per annum over a 3-year period. So after 3 years, you're about increased your size by about 1/3. In the OECD context, we take something that's a bit higher. We take the high growth scalers, which grow on average by 20% over a 3-year period. And those are kind of a bit of abstract numbers, but basically what it means, a scaler grows by about 1/3 of its size over 3 years. So if you have 10 employees, after 3 years, you end up at 13, 14 employees, which might not sound that much, but in the end, that's quite an increase in your wage bill, in the way you have to manage your firm. And if you start out from a higher scale, like let's say 20, 30, or 40, you actually add like 6, 10, 20 additional employees, and that's quite a lot of mass to absorb in your firm and to make sure that your structures work. And this is not just something where you hire people and it works, but this is the crucial point. When you scale up, you grow, but you actually do more. You transform what you're doing. You create new products that you're selling. You create new opportunities within the firm for employees. You create new, more professional structures. You add managerial structures and so on. So this kind of growth that we're seeing is not just growth. It is really a transformation of the firm. And this is kind of where we started this project to try to understand what is this transformation. When we look at the data from the 5 pilot countries, Finland, Italy, Portugal, the Slovak Republic, and Spain, what we see is that scaling up is rare. In good times, so we look here at the 2015 to 17 period, we have about 13 to 15 non-micro SMEs, SMEs with 10 to 249 employees that scale up, that grow over a 3-year period by about 1/3. But what these few firms actually do is they contribute a lot to our economies. They're responsible for more than half, between 50 and 70% of new jobs added in our economies. 50 to 70% of jobs are the ones that are being added by those fast-growing firms over these 3 years. The other added jobs tend to come from new firms entering the market. A lot of importance also on the startup side and the addition of jobs there, but it's really the scale-up that creates the vast bulk of new jobs. And when we think about scale-ups, often it is very much associated with the startup notion. You go from startup into becoming a scale-up, into growing fast. But the curious thing we see is that it's actually not just something for the young firms, the scaling up. As Sally over the other side, mentioned, the low Europe has been around for 10, 12, 13 some years. And they're continuously looking for opportunities to grow and to expand, to scale up, and now looking at going outside of their traditional location, Brussels. It's not the rapidly growing after 3, 4, 5 years, I kind of add more and I grow fast, but it is the strategic choice after years of establishing relationships, after planning, and then growing further. And if we look at the data, the typical scaler is actually a mature firm that is operating in a low knowledge-intensive service sector. And this is not because firms in those sectors are particularly likely to grow rapidly over a short period and become scalers, but it is because most firms are actually in those sectors. And they do have a certain percentage, a lower chance than young firms to scale up, but because there's so many, there are, in the aggregate, a large share, or the largest share, of firms that scale up in the mature and less knowledge-intensive sector. For the young, there's good news, because when we think about what happens to scalers, we first want to understand what happens during this growth phase and what happens when they grow. But we also want to see what happens after they are successfully scaled up. When we look at some of the worries that people put in the room, what we see is that one of the biggest worries that our colleagues on the policy side have is that if you scale up, if you grow rapidly over a short period of time, you become a victim of your own success. You're doing too much, you're getting too big. But we don't actually know the numbers for these things unless we try and look into data that we have in a new way. And what we did was to follow scalers, not just during the period where they scale up, but also in the subsequent 3 years to see what happens to them. And the good news is the vast majority, 60% or even more, continue to maintain their new scale, consolidate, or even grow further. And here, especially the young are more likely to continue their growth spurt. They're not just growing once, but they're scaling up in the subsequent 3 years. The last aspect we were able to look into, and this is from the data perspective, probably the most exciting part because it gets us closer at trying to really understand what can we do to support scalers. It is to open the black box of firms and not just look at the aggregate. Scalers are, for the most part, mature and less knowledge-intensive sectors. But on the other hand, firms that are young and more in high-tech sectors are more likely to scale up individually. But we wanted to dig it a bit deeper and understand what is this transformation that happens in firms. What are the changes that are happening? What are the changes they're making? And what we see here is that a lot of scalers don't just fall into their scaling up phase. It's not something that comes miraculously, but there is a preparatory way. There's investment that is being taken beforehand. We see that they increase in the aggregate their share of R&D workers compared to firms that are similar, that don't scale up. They invest more into digital. They have internal people that are specialized in IT services before they scale up. And they also are successful before they enter a growth phase. They tend to be more productive and tend to also look more outwards when it comes to opportunities. They're more intensive in terms of export and import. And that's a good point for me to stop. With this, we published a report. It's available on the OECD website. You have the policy highlights here. We have very exciting findings, and we would very much like to continue working on this one and further reinforce our knowledge on scalers to help them really scale up. Thank you very much.
Take the stand and respond. Thank you.
Thank you. And good morning, all. I just would like to start to congratulate the Slovenian presidency and the European Commission, of course, for this event that I believe has a special meaning for all of us, taking into account what we have been experiencing for more than 1.5 years. And it's very good to be here in person and debating these kind of subjects, and so important for our SMEs and, of course, and above all for our future. I think that's very important. I would also like to thank the European Commission and OECD for inviting me to be part of this panel and discuss around better understand firms grow to help SMEs to scale up, a project where Portugal has been involved as a pilot country. Having said that, Portugal welcomes the results of this project. Results highlighted the relevance of scalers for economic growth and job creation. As the report says, few SMEs scale up, as Alexander said, but these few firms are the major driver of new jobs added to OECD economies. Looking into Portugal's case and to the report, between 2016 and 2018, around 6,200 employment scalers created more than 140,000 jobs. It's a significant number. However, as pointed out throughout the report, understanding how policies can effectively support scalers require more dedicated work. In that sense, and looking into what Portugal has been doing for the past years, we support such a view and encourage additional research on this topic. In fact, Portugal is today a nation with great potential for attracting and developing startups and scale-ups. Portuguese startup ecosystem is still young, but is one of the best assets Portugal has, with small scale but fast pace and steadily growing companies representing over 1% of the country's GDP. As the local market is quite small, it forces startups and SMEs to address international markets. I think it's a weakness turned into a strength. This is an important differentiator element when looking at other ecosystems with bigger critical masses, where most often the internationalization part becomes quite later on the path of the companies. Portugal has improved this position in international rankings of innovation and entrepreneurship, ranked as 39 out of 190 economies in the Easy of Doing Businesses ranking, and was also singled out as one of the 40 most suitable countries for doing businesses. This is the result of great dynamism from companies and from technological infrastructure, but also the great involvement of a multiplicity of agents of entrepreneurial ecosystems such as incubators, accelerators, universities, public sectors, agencies, a set of actions directed for financing, and government policies, of course. However, something has happened. Everyone knows that COVID has happened and came to redefine the concept of disruption. More than ever, survival is linked not to size or strength, but to resilience and ability to change and adapt. And at the same time, we believe that there are clear opportunities for scaling and scaling up created by the crisis. To this end, government support, already in the pre-pandemic phase and was now reinforced, has proven to be fundamental. Highlighting the importance given to entrepreneurial ecosystem and scaling up, European Startup Nation Alliance was launched during the 2021 Web Summit edition, and it is the first body with the mission of supporting European governments with improving structural conditions for startups in order to make sure they can grow in any stage of this life cycle. Yesterday we had the opportunity to have a dedicated session about this agency in the SME Assembly. At this point, we can already consider ourselves as a startup nation, but our expectations is that we can be a scale-up nation and a unicorn nation. National New Strategy for Entrepreneurial Ecosystems involves doubling the numbers to reach an ecosystem of 5,000 companies and 50,000 jobs, representing over 2% of the country's GDP. So having said this, we have an entrepreneurship ecosystem with great potential, which is why there is an ambition to consolidate it. At the same time, and because potential scalers are not only recent startups or firms in highly technology sectors, it is necessary to reinforce the framework in which our companies can be born but also can grow with specific programs and allow us to accelerate at all stages. For that, a coordinated policy approach is needed to support the scaling of SMEs, traditional and not traditional, and startups. To face this challenge, it is important to have more efficient policies through better targeting, and this type of study is particularly useful for understanding, based on microdata companies, the factors that justify the growth. In the current situation of recovery and public policies definition, Portugal highlights the importance of being part of this project and considers relevant the participation of other countries, as the analytical approach allows to obtain results that are comparable between countries and supports an effective dissemination of the results among different stakeholders and policymakers. This type of database studies are very relevant for the strategies to be defined. For Portugal, this project gives us indications of areas of public policy relevant to scalability, such as education and qualification of workers, bet on ICT and R&D, promotion of certain markets, as so. So I will stop for that from here. Thank you, and we'll discuss it later.
Thank you very much, Anna. Jan, could I ask you to respond from Startup Network?
Good morning. Thank you for inviting me to this panel. It's a great pleasure. I also had the pleasure to look at the major findings of your report, and I think it's certainly relevant and important work. But let me start off by saying that when we discuss scalers and startups, it's not an or story for Europe. It's really an and story, right? We need both, and both are crucial for Europe. Still, I found some similarities with our approach, some differences, and I also have some questions for you. So let's start first with the similarities. So as you know, we have prepared an action plan to make Europe the scale-up continent. And this action plan is consisting of 21 concrete actions grouped in 4 teams. There is a team around talent, there is a team around ecosystems, and there is a team about joint responsibilities between member states and the EU. But interesting for today, we have a team about data and taxonomy. And that's the first team that we identify. Because if we don't agree on definitions, if we don't agree on taxonomy, basically how can we measure what we do? And there is indeed confusion in Europe about what's a startup, what's a scale-up, what's a unicorn. So I think there we have the same concerns. And maybe it's a bit early, but I reach out my hand to collaborate there. I think this would be useful. Another similarity I see is that startups, they are heavily embedded into their ecosystem. We did the European Startup Monitor, which year over year is doing an assessment of the startup ecosystem. And we see that startups and scale-ups are heavily working with other SMEs, with universities, and so on. And that only 8% have no collaboration. So I think analyzing this aspect on growth is also essential. A second thing is there are differences, right? There are different beasts. The major difference is probably access to capital, where cross-border investment is important. In Europe, we don't have these pan-European investment funds. And for scalers, they are in a completely different position with respect to their cash flow. So I think that that's a difference. We should also look at this, access to capital at the beginning of the scaling cycle, but also at the end. So there, simplified, there is a concern. US doesn't save, Europe saves, the money goes to the US and is used by American VCs to buy our pearls of innovation, right? Maybe another difference also is that, so it is important, like in ESNA, for instance, it's written that it should be very easy to start a company, but in the startup mindset, it should also be equally easy to stop a company. If you look at how different the perception is of failing between the US and Europe, we really need a sea change there. So we need to be able to have restart, because I think you mentioned startups that go to the scaling phase, a lot of them fail. So, but these entrepreneurs, they have learned something, so we need to be able to get them back into gear. Then it brings me to my third point, which is question marks I have. One is about talent. I think talent is essential for scalers and for scale-ups, that there is no doubt. One particular concern of us is that if you look, for instance, at female founders, if you look at the VC money going to them, it's only like 1 or 2%, which is a tragedy. If you dig deeper, you see that 81% of startups are founded by a team, and this is certainly good news because the correlation between starting with a team and being successful is there. 64% are all male teams, 7% are all female teams, and 29% are mixed teams. So I wonder how this is for scalers and if we have lessons to learn from one another. Another thing is about what is the profile of people that's going to work for you. There was an interesting OECD study recently, a few years ago, which linked the characteristics of a country with respect to risk aversion and hierarchy to entrepreneurship and intrapreneurship, right? And it was found that in some countries, like the Netherlands, they were scoring very high on entrepreneurship, but in countries like Belgium, where people are more risk averse, they scored very high on entrepreneurship. And this seems to be communicating vases. So the scalers are somewhere in between, because it's not the huge corporations where you're extremely safe, and it's not the startups where you're extremely unsafe. So if you think about how to attract people, maybe it's interesting to know their profile and to reflect about that. So my conclusion at my short summary here is that, as I said, it's not an or, it's an and for Europe. And I would like to reach out to work together, and our team 1 on open data and definitions seem a good start. Thank you.
Wow, thank you very much, panel. Fizzing with thoughts and ideas and loads of food for thought. Can I open the session now to questions, please? I've got quite a few from the online audience, but please, you get first go in the room. So questions to the panel. It's Peter Verstel.
Yes, good morning all. SME Envoy from the Netherlands. Thank you very much, panel members. That's better. Peter Waasdorp, SME Envoy for the Netherlands. Thank you very much, panel members, for this highly interesting study. And I encourage all study and reports into scaling up, because it is a question, how do companies scale up? And at the same time, we want more companies to scale up. So I encourage more and more studies into that. I was wondering if you had looked into the ambitions and drivers of entrepreneurs, because in my experience it's difficult to find the right answer why some companies scale up and others don't. And of course there are external factors, access to finance, access to talent, etc. But also internal factors, and that's all about the ambition and entrepreneurial capabilities of the entrepreneur, him or herself. So I was wondering if that's is part of the project, and if you could reflect upon that. Thank you.
Who wants to take that one first? Alexander? Yes, I think so. Thanks.
I fully agree. We very much know that ambition and the willingness to grow is one of the key preconditions for growth, but it's also one of the hardest things to tackle if you want to go very, very broad, and especially when you want to study some rare phenomena like scaling up. You know, what we can do and what we have done is look at the changes the entrepreneurs make before the scaling up happens. Are they hiring managers? Are they changing the structure of their workers? Are they engaging with external markets? And this is something where we would want to dig a bit deeper in the next phases and try to see whether we can get more at this ambition element. Maybe not at ambition itself, but what we can do is, for example, entrepreneurial experience, very important point, so we can see whether the owners have experience beforehand. Do they come from different sectors? Do they hire people with new skill sets and so on? The ambition itself, you have to really ask people what is their underlying motivation, and that is really hard to get into at a broad scale to really understand across all countries what we want to do. But what we can do, and this relates a little bit to the point of targeting our policies that Anna mentioned, is our ambition is not to tell you which firms are the ones that have the greatest growth potential and you should support them. What we are supporting is an approach where you reach out your hand and you can ask these firms where you see there are changes happening within the firm that might indicate there's future growth potential. You reach out a hand, you have an agency that helps speak to these firms and ask them what is it you need. Because in the end, and this is an extremely important point that Jan made, they are all very different from each other. And the needs are very different. The ambitions might be different. It's not just growth. It might be greening. It might be social aspects that they want to strengthen further. And we have to understand what is it that these firms actually need from us when we create our policies. So not really the ambition to kind of tell you, you should be doing this much money, putting it into these sectors, but finding those with potential and seeing what is their need, and then make this effort and ask them, we see good things happening, are you willing to grow, do you want to grow, where do you want to go, to be a bit more efficient than trying to do it broad scale.
Jan, I think you wanted to come in.
So agreeing with Alexander, but also agreeing with me. I think it's really interesting to also understand the intrinsic motivation of entrepreneurs. I don't know what I'm doing wrong. So, because you have things like social entrepreneurship, impact entrepreneurship, it would be nice to have a view on that. Yeah.
And maybe it would be nice to understand sometimes entrepreneurs just choose not to scale up. And why that happens. It's like they don't have, is it a question of ambition? It's a question of just be small because they just want to be small and just want to be disruptive as a small startup. So I think that's something that we should think, because we just don't, I think all of them don't need to scale up. They have the choice to choose not to scale up. Yeah.
Thank you. I've got a question from the online audience about gender. Jan, you mentioned this, but I'm going to come to perhaps Anna first to ask what your findings were. What does the report tell us about gender factors in entrepreneurship and scaling up in businesses?
I think we have come from a path at the moment. I think right now we've done a lot, and we need to do a lot more, but I think that an important bet on human resources and human education, a focus of course on women, I think it's one of the most important parts of the game, of the game. For instance, in the case of Portugal, I think it's a good number. One of our major problems is the lack of human resources. And I think it was today is like it was last week, I think. It was launched, the DESI was launched. And for instance, Portugal, just one of the indicators that Portugal raised most was the human capital, special in women. So I think that shows that we are doing something, and human capital and bet on women capital are key. It's key. Yeah.
Thank you. Sorry, Jan, would you like to add anything to that?
So agreeing with Anna, so access to talent is essential for the startup ecosystems, and we can just not, as Europe, allow ourselves to miss half of the population as entrepreneurs. That's too silly. I also believe in diversity in teams. So it's maybe not male versus female, but it's really about having diverse founder teams and a diverse workforce. There are indicators. So we have a sister group, which is the female VC group that is also advising Commissioner Gabriel, and they produce figures that they say that for every euro invested in female founded companies, they have a 50 to 100% more return on investment in euros. Yeah. So, I mean, these are interesting facts and figures, but so I think it's very important that we get a very diverse landscape.
Ludger.
Yeah, if I can maybe take this question sort of as a passport toto and elevate it to a larger level, it shows that today's world, in terms of policy making, we are getting ever more ambitious in developing and fine-tuning and calibrating the policies we want to do. We are not just interested in, getting some firms to grow, but we are also attached to it, rightly so, certain criteria. Say we in particular want, female entrepreneurs to grow, or businesses in certain sectors, contributing to fighting climate change to grow, So the ambitions, rightly so, in policy making have are ever growing. I'm in this business since 30 years, and I see that it's ever more specific what you need to do, and to be able to do that, to respond to that ever more fine-tuned requirements, you simply need to be smarter in terms of knowing what's going on, and this is what this project is about, to really be sort of trying to show how, how to be smarter. The elegant thing about this project is, in terms of resources, it doesn't require huge investment into compiling new data. This is about more intelligently looking at in each country, and in a way, each country is a pilot project where we really look, okay, what data is there? What data sources? Social security data, employment agency data, business register data. How can it be combined to know more about, the businesses that are there and about the specificities, and I think this is really the, again, coming back to the main theme of this project, to show that it's possible to get much smarter as a policymaker to understand what are the business you're dealing with, and dividing the sort of from that policies that cater to their needs.
Thank you very much. Alexander.
And just to chime in on Ludger's point, I think it's especially when it comes to questions like gender balance and how can we understand what happens within the firms, it's crucial that we combine different data sources from different institutions. The Netherlands is one of the prime examples where the National Statistical Office has the ability to bring in data sources that are produced anywhere in the public sector, put them together, and we can actually understand who are these kind of people, what are the characteristics that work in firms of different types. Where we could do this in our pilot study, we already saw that scalers are very much a reflection of the society as a whole. They don't tend to be more male or more female to begin with, but then when it comes to the scaling up phase, there is a bit of a trend towards hiring more men than women. Right? There might be different reasons for this one, and it's one of the key things we want to look into in the next phase. So if you're interested in those topics, this is also very much on our agenda.
Very interesting. In my company, I'm always trying to hire men because I've got about 75% of women. Yes. But I always hire the best people. So, can I to the room? Questions, please. Hello, sir.
Hello, Jesus Gonzalez from BME, Spain. What about financing? Have you seen any differences between the access to financing from startups to scale-ups, the ability to access to banking financing, loans, state aid, or even private equity or venture capital, or why not going to a market? Have you seen something? Are you interested in this particular phase? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yes, big issue, big question. Who would like to jump in here? Alexander.
I think access to finance is key for growth. Access to finance in all its variety and forms, and it's especially kind of having access to a good mix of finance that's crucial for us. And one of the things we are quite worried about is with the current crisis is that this kind of diversity we've seen growing over the years before the COVID crisis has not kind of continued to grow and might have even been reduced. For our project, in the current pilot phase, we've looked only into bank finance. We haven't been able to look at VCs and other sources of finance at this stage. And what we see is that in preparation of scaling up, scalers do have more debt than comparable firms of similar size, working in the same sector, of a similar age, and so on. So we see that they are able to borrow more beforehand in terms as a ratio of their turnover compared to others. And this is one of the pieces that enables them to grow, because as they grow, this debt ratio declines. So you see this preparatory investment that firms make using capital raised from banks and potentially other sources, we don't know, to invest into either more innovation-related activities, new processes, and so on. Sorry, just to add the point, but what's crucial here is that we take Jan's comment very, very seriously, that We talk about scalers as a large group, but as SMEs, they're extremely heterogeneous. There are scalers in construction, in high tech. There are scalers that are mature. There are scalers that are young. There are scalers that come right out of their growth phase. And the financing needs and also the support needs in general for these different types of scalers are very much likely to differ very across the spectrum. So while we look at this on the aggregate, we should also acknowledge that we need to dig deeper and look into those heterogeneity. Where are certain type of instruments more successful?
Thank you. I'm going to go to the online audience now. We've had a question about unicorns, which Anna mentioned. We're having success in Europe in seeing more unicorns. And but the question is, does the report point to factors which have made the difference in bringing in more unicorns in Europe, but we're still lagging behind the US? Ludger, would you like to take this one?
Well, I think with unicorns, we are right in the middle of also what Jan initially sort of alluded to, the problem of defining, what we are looking at, what is a scalar, A unicorn is clearly a company, dynamically evolving company, But obviously, the measure there is first of all capitalization, And there, I think it's, the picture right now is indeed that, given also the vast advantage that the firms in the US particularly have in getting access to VC, venture capital, you do see more unicorns in the US still. But having said that, I think there are encouraging signs that you have the number of these unicorns are also growing in Europe, I think the unicorns are sort of a special kind of subbreed again under, in this context of scalers up. They of course look for and rely in particular on capitalization and defined by that. And that in turn points to a particular issue or shortcoming still in Europe. That means getting access to venture capital, And I think, again, right now the project, in this pilot phase has not yet been able to really look into all sorts of financing to as Alexander has said. But we are certainly aiming in the next phase to see whether we can have a better handle on this, at least in some countries, to see, okay, what does it, what's the situation in getting access to venture capital and, equity in general. So that is certainly something that we are definitely looking forward to.
Thank you. Hi, Jan.
Maybe one thing about unicorns. So we could debate whether unicorns are overhyped or not. Let's not do this here. But one very important thing about unicorns, European unicorns, is that they serve as role models for entrepreneurs, right? So when you have a unicorn in your city, in your region, you get the feeling as an entrepreneur, if they can do it, I can do it. And we don't have then to look just to Silicon Valley or to this kind of, and that's a very important positive snowball effect of having unicorns in Europe. And so I'm very hopeful for this role model they play.
If I can add an anecdote to what Jan has said, I was 2 weeks ago in Portugal at the SWAMP Summit, bringing together 40,000 people from the IT industry, lots of venture capitalists, and they had one gadget there, a big model of a unicorn where you could climb up on and get a photo. And this was immensely popular. So there were always queues of people wanting to get up and get a photo on the unicorn. So that's just a funny anecdote to underline that point. They are really sort of, lighthouses, people, signaling people, okay, that's something I also want to, get to. That's the prime function.
It can work as an engine. So I think that's one of the most the important takeaways that we can take from it. It's like it can work as an engine for other firms. Yes.
Because entrepreneurs need something to aim for and ambition and support in that too. I'm going to bring this session to a close unless I have any more quick questions from the room. Question? from
Hi, sorry.
Martha.
Martha Lansley. I'm an intern at Low Europe and sort of aspiring international lawyer. And I just read your policy highlights, and I was wondering, because I see that most firms looking to scale up are mature firms. And I was just wondering whether you have a plan or initiative to bring in younger firms, while I appreciate that it's harder for them to scale up because they don't have the sort of expertise, but whether there was a plan to help them to start scaling up, because a lot of young firms have the modern expertise, the modern technology that could actually help older firms to more digitalize their organization and bring them more into the modern technology. So that's my first question. And secondly, I just wanted to understand whether you were looking to provide a sort of Europe-wide initiative that can help across Europe, or to provide more tailored expertise to regions and organizations which might have more regional expertise, and whether if they were looking to scale up, they could come to you. So that's my question.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay, I'm going to go to Luke.
Yeah. A lot of stuff, but I mean, I'm going to focus a bit on the first question, because that's indeed, I think, a highly relevant one. And the answer is yes. We are, at least on the EU level, we have, and we are in the process of developing particular policy instruments for that kind of firms that you're mentioning. I would just name check the innovation, sort of the European Innovation Council, which is, EIC in short, which was, set up to particularly give a boost to, helping in general to solve a problem that Europe has as compared to other regions. Meaning, there's a lot of research going on, a lot of in firms and in institutions, but then bringing that research to the market, that's where the bottleneck is. And there, the EIC's, this European Innovation Council has a lot of very exciting policy instruments that are now in place, and that some of them will be put in place. I mentioned just the Eicl Accelerator, which is an instrument which really is, you can approach as a young firm with an innovative idea and say, look, I have this kind of very innovative technical approach. You make this pitch, you get, maybe in the first phase, you get some grants to help you develop it, to test it, and so on. And then building on that, when it has proven successful, you can ask for a venture capital, participation. And it's actually the first instrument where actually the EU invests directly into firms. So it's a very novel instrument. Beforehand, we have other instruments like Eicl, like also the IPO funds that are also in the setup, but they are more indirectly. EU funds going into other investors, under other funds, which then in turn investor funds. So yes, there are already quite a few policy instruments in place, and others like the ESC fund are putting in place. And there's the testing from my experience in Lisbon at this Web Summit. There's a huge interest in this, and it looks like that we have to really beef up the funds that are there.
Alexander.
Maybe on the second question very quickly. The key point is the one that Jan made. It's not an or, it's an and. Right? We want to have support for the startups, but we have to acknowledge that firms that start up at some point need to scale up, and this is a different kind of beast of support. But then we also see the spectrum of firms that are not young, not kind of right out of their startup phase into a scale-up phase, but that scale up at a later date. And we have to think about the opportunities that those can provide as well. And when it comes to providing this support locally, this is exactly the point about the external factors, the networks, the work that people do in their local areas. As Jan pointed out, it's a small percentage that is not integrated in their local fabric. And this is also when you design a support policy for scalers, it is an important point to think you don't have to kind of expect for them to come to you. It's something where you want to provide the support locally, you want to reach out a hand and say, we're here, we're next to you, and we can help you connect with those that are like you, with other kind of firms with potential, with other scalers, and give you these examples, these growth opportunities, be it unicorns or be it other scalers, that help you understand the problems you will be facing and how to deal with them.
You're looking at me, Jan. Would you like to come in? Yes.
Very briefly. With respect to policy recommendation for scaling up, I would recommend you to look at Scale Up Europe, which will be elaborated during the French presidency even further. Secondly, I think indeed at the European Commission level, I really sense a shifting focus towards more concrete actions, and that's certainly a good thing, involving all services of the EU. And thirdly, I would concur with Lutger that the EIC is in fact the place where the different action plans and the SNS and the Female Founders Initiative, etc., come together and are aligned to achieve the goal that we all want, is to make Europe, the global powerhouse for startups.
Well, that's a great moment to close on. I want to thank all the speakers today for your amazing contributions. Ludger mentioned opening a treasure trove, and it really feels like that. There's so much ambition. We heard from Anna about the ambition and the amazing work that you've done in Portugal. We know from Jan that it's not scaling up or starting up. It's and that's very important. And for me, a few really striking statistics from you, Alexander, about the scaler growing by a third of its size in 3 years, and all the practical problems that presents with, taking on people and the costs that. And I'm kind of in that space a little bit at the moment, so I take that away. Thank you very, very much to all of you, and thank you to our marvelous hosts here in Slovenia. And please enjoy the rest of the assembly.
Thank you.